Greetings. Good evening. Welcome. For those of you who are new here, my name is Grace. I'm a digital organizer at the Redress Movement. This is the Recon, the Redress Conversation, where I talk about various things, housing and social justice related. Thank you for joining me. I do this every other Thursday, usually from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I know I'm a little early this evening. I'm just here and I just have energy for it. If you're tuning in live, great. Thank you so much. If you're watching after the fact on our YouTube channel, also great. Thank you so much. If you want to keep up with the things we're doing at the Redress Movement, these are, well, over here are our social media handles. You can follow us on Twitter or Instagram. We're also on Facebook and we're also on LinkedIn. Over here is our email, hello@redressmovement.org. If you're interested in getting more involved in the work that we're doing, you can always shoot an email over to that email. You'll be connected with me or one of my other digital organizers. And, I'm sorry, I just can't. My sweater is just not, sitting where I need it to. It looks, awkward. It'll connect you with one of our digital organizers. So what are we doing this evening? I know you're wondering. I'm very excited for what we have planned for tonight. Because I'm going to be talking about what is and what isn't organizing. The reason, well, I'll get into this, but there's a lot of reasons why I wanted to cover this today. I think it's really important because I feel that a lot of times when we're talking about organizing work, first of all, you may have had no experience with organizing work, and that's okay. And so when someone says that, you might not really understand what that means. But also because I think there's a lot of things that are similar or tangentially related to organizing work, but that aren't organizing, and it's an important distinction to make. But first, the question of the day, because I love having a question of the day, is if you could teach a class in anything, what would it be? If you're here live, you can leave it in the chat. If not, please leave a comment and tell me what class you would teach, because I desperately want to know. What would I teach? If I was teaching a master class, what would I want to teach? I've answered this question several times before, so I'm trying to think of a unique answer I haven't given before. And also I'm trying to make this not organizing related, because I do teach things on organizing. But I'm trying to avoid that. I think I would probably teach some kind of an art class. I think I would want to teach something about rolling with the punches sort of circumstances. So either a class on how to make art with found objects, or how to do this whole painting and now spill paint on it and now rework the painting, just something like that. That's very let's break the rules, let's get chaotic, and then let's roll with it. Because I think that would be really fun and a real stretch for some people. So that's what I would teach. Please leave your answer, and let's all start our own master classes on these topics. So getting into what we're talking about today. So there's a lot of misconceptions about organizing. I know for myself, when I tell people I'm a professional organizer, especially if I say it like that, I say, oh, I'm a professional organizer, and I don't say anything else, they go, oh, so you go into people's homes and you reorganize their house? And I'm like, no, I'm not Marie Kondo. Trust me. And I think so oftentimes I tell people I'm a community organizer at a nonprofit. People at least get more in the right realm of what I do when I say it that way, and I'm at least you have a general better idea of what I do if I say it that way. And I think by and large, when I first started explaining it, I remember I used to do a program at my high school where basically students who were previous alumni, or I guess alumni of the high school, would come back and talk to current students about college and your career and things like that. And so I would go, and when I was still in school but I was starting to do organizing, I was talking to them about organizing, and I realized they didn't really what they understood when I described my job what they understood, what they would have called that was not an organizer. And I think this is really interesting. And I think there's a lot of reasons for this. One of them perhaps being that organizing as a role in society, as a job, there's a whole discourse around paid organizing, and I'm reluctant to like get into that at this moment. But organizing as like a role in society, at least in the United States, has, I think, largely been left out of teachings. And I think there's an intentional reason for that. Not to like put on my tinfoil hat, because I'm not here to do that today. But I could at any moment. I think it's been intentionally not taught and not mainstream, because of the potential power it holds to change systems and to make real political change. And of course, for anybody who either likes the power that they have or likes the way things are, they don't want people to know that they have power to change that thing. And that can apply to a lot of different situations. So what I'm going to do basically today is I'm going to walk you through some other, I'm going to tell you what organizing isn't in order to eventually tell you what organizing is. And I hope that this is clarifying for you, because I realize also on this platform in particular, I've talked a lot about organizing, and sometimes without creating some parameters around it, a lot of things can get confused with it. So that's my plan for today. But first, I am going to I'm going to read you a story. I hate the way I said that. Okay. I'm going to read you the story. For those of you maybe not watching and just listening along, this is Stone Soup by Marsha Brown. And I'm going to read it. I hope you enjoy that there's like pictures too, if you're watching and not just listening. Okay. 3 soldiers trudged down a road in a strange country. They were on their way home from the war. Besides being tired, they were hungry. In fact, they had eaten nothing for 2 days. "How I would like a good dinner tonight," said the first, "and a bed to sleep in," said the second. "But all that is impossible," said the third. "We must march on." On they marched. Suddenly ahead of them, they saw the lights of a village. "Maybe we'll find a bite to eat there," said the first. "And a loft to sleep in," said the second. "No harm in asking," said the third. Now the peasants of that place feared strangers. When they heard that 3 soldiers were coming down the road, they talked amongst themselves. "Here come 3 soldiers. Soldiers are always hungry, but we have little enough for ourselves." And they hurried to hide their food. They pushed sacks of barley under the hay in lofts. They lowered buckets of milk down the wells. They spread old quilts over the carrot bins. They hid their cabbage and potatoes under the beds. They hung their meats in the cellars. They hid all they had to eat. Then they waited. The soldiers stopped first at the house of Paul and Francois. "Good evening to you," they said. "Could you spare a bit of food for 3 hungry soldiers?" "We have had no food for ourselves for 3 days," said Paul. Francois made a sad face. "It has been a poor harvest." The 3 soldiers went on to the house of Albert and Louise. "Could you spare a bit of food, and have you some corner where we could sleep for the night?" "Oh no," said Albert. "We gave all we could spare to soldiers who came before you. Our beds are full," said Louise. At Vincent and Marie's, the answer was the same. It had been a poor harvest, and all the grain must be kept for seed. So it went all through the village. Not a peasant had any food to give away. They all had good reasons. One family had used the grain for feed. Another had an old sick father to care for. All had too many mouths to feed. The villagers stood in the street and sighed. They looked as hungry as they could. The 3 soldiers talked together. The first soldier called out, "Good people!" The peasants drew near. "We are 3 hungry soldiers in a strange land. We have asked you for food and you have no food. Well then, we'll have to make stone soup." The peasants stared. Stone soup? That would be something to know about. "First, we'll need a large iron pot," the soldiers said. The peasants brought the largest pot they could find. How else to cook enough? "There's none too large," said the soldiers, "but it will do." "Oh, that's none too large," said the soldiers, "but it will do. And now water to fill it and a fire to heat it." It took many buckets of water to fill the pot. A fire was built on the village square and the pot was set to boil. "And now, if you please, 3 round, smooth stones." Those were easy to find. The peasants' eyes grew round as they watched the soldiers drop the stones into the pot. "Any soup needs salt and pepper," said the soldiers as they began to stir. Children ran to fetch salt and pepper. "Stones like these generally make good soup, but oh, if there were carrots, it would be much better." "Why, I think I have a carrot or two," said Francois, and off she ran. She came back with her apron full of carrots from the bin beneath the red quilt. "A good stone soup should have cabbage," said the soldiers as they sliced the carrots into a pot, "but no use asking for what you don't have." "I think I could find a cabbage somewhere," said Marie, and she hurried home. Back she came with 3 cabbages from the cupboard under the bed. "If we only had a bit of beef and a few potatoes, this soup would be good enough for a rich man's table." The peasants thought that over. They remembered their potatoes and the sides of beef hanging in the cellar. They ran to fetch them. Rich man's soup, and all from a few stones! It seemed like magic. "Ah," sighed the soldiers as they stirred in the beef and potatoes, "if we only had a little barley and a cup of milk, this soup would be fit for the king himself. Indeed, he asked for just such a soup when he last dined with us." The peasants looked at each other. The soldiers had entertained the king? Well, but no use asking for what you don't have, the soldiers sighed. The peasants brought their barley from the lofts. They brought their milk from the wells. The soldiers stirred the barley and milk into a steaming broth while the peasants stared. At last the soup was ready. "All of you shall taste," the soldiers said. "But first, a table must be set." Great tables were placed in the square, and all around were lighted torches. Such a soup! How good it smelled! Truly fit for a king. But then the peasants asked themselves, would not such a soup require bread, and a roast, and cider? Soon a banquet was spread, and everyone sat down to eat. Never had there been such a feast. Never had the peasants tasted such soup. And fancy, made from stones. They ate and drank and ate and drank, and after that they danced. They danced and sang far into the night. At last they were tired. Then the 3 soldiers asked, "Is there not a loft where we could sleep?" "Let 3 such wise and splendid gentlemen sleep in a loft? Indeed, they must have the best beds in the village." So the first soldier slept in the priest's house, the second soldier slept in the baker's house, and the third soldier slept in the mayor's house. In the morning, the whole village gathered in the square to give them a send-off. "Many thanks for what you have taught us," the peasants said to the soldiers. "We shall never go hungry, now that we know how to make soup from stones." "Oh, it's all in the knowing how," said the soldiers, and off they went down the road. Such men don't grow on every bush. The end. So that's my little story. I hope you liked it. I'm gonna get into, I feel like if you know, you already saw the glimmers of like why I'm telling you this story, but if you don't know, then I hope you're really confused as to like why I'm telling you this story. I'm just kind of backpedaling because there was one part that when I was reading it, I was like, oh, like I want to say that too. Anyway, so let's get into it. Let's get into kind of the differences here. Now, I think also I want to preface it with saying, so Stone Soup is obviously like a fairy tale and a fable. It's not the most perfect organizing example, but it's the one I'm going to use because I think it's a really I had never heard it, and then when I did hear it, I was like, actually, this is such a funny example to use. So let's get into a little bit of the what isn't, so that I can tell you what is. So the first isn't organizing. The first thing that isn't organizing is mutual aid work. So mutual aid is about cooperating to serve community members. So mutual aid creates a network of care and generosity to meet the immediate needs of other people in the community, whether that's our neighbors, whether it's some other community we may be a part of. It's everyday people filling in the gaps of each other's needs, right? And it's filling, these gaps are created by deeply rooted systems of inequality. So it's a short-term solution that people can do to fill those immediate needs of one another. So an example of this, which might be confusing, is the free breakfast program offered by the Black Panther Party. So that's meeting an immediate need of the community, right? That is present and that everyday people kind of contribute to, right? I'm trying to think of another, because I've been using a lot of COVID examples to illustrate this. So another example of like mutual aid might have been that at the start of the pandemic, there was a lot of people who, I'm trying to give you current examples as opposed to just historical ones, because I think the historical ones are really good, but I want like you to kind of see like this exists now, because I think that's another part of organizing being so not mainstream anymore, is we only talk about it in the past and we don't talk about it in the present. So a good, mutual aid networks obviously still exist, but an example might have just an example that sprung up was during the pandemic, when you saw groups of people, whether in an apartment building or in a neighborhood, who, were younger and were going grocery shopping for the elderly members of that community, right? There was an immediate need, like, I don't have any groceries and I don't feel comfortable going to the grocery store. So people stepped in to fill that need, right? But that's a short-term solution to like, all right, well, we have this pandemic, I can help for now, but eventually we need, people need to start feeling safe going to the grocery store again, right? Anyway, so that's mutual aid. And I also want to say this to say that as I get into these, what organizing isn't, this isn't with a negative spin in any way. There is nothing wrong with mutual aid. There's nothing, organizing is not like superior to mutual aid work. That is not it at all. I think in a lot of instances, organizing always is in lockstep with mutual aid work in some regard, or is very often in lockstep with mutual aid work, as it should be. Because while we're working on these long-term, as I said, these deeply rooted systems of inequality, which will take a long time to get out or to fix or to change, people are going to have very immediate needs, right? If you look at issues of, displacement or homelessness, there's obviously people who are going to have very immediate needs, right? If they're being evicted or they're being kicked out of their home, right? Those are very immediate things that can or need to be addressed in the short term before we can win like a long-term solution to that. Hence why my other example was the Black Panther Party, who understood this, and while they were working for long-term solutions, they also provided short-term mutual aid to meet those immediate needs. Yeah. What was that noise? I'm like, what the heck? Trash can just got... Okay. So next, and this is, I think, really the bigger one that gets confused with organizing, is activism. And again, there's nothing wrong with activism. There's nothing wrong with activism. I think activism as like a word and the way it's used is extremely broad. But it usually refers to like an individual or kind of like one person kind of in isolation. It is based on to say you're an activist about something is kind of based on an abstract opposition in principle rather than an attempt to obtain concrete concessions that are from the people in power. And that the people in power may be your bosses, they may be state officials, landlords, whatever. Activism or like a group of activists may be politically scattered, They might be very reactive or kind of unfocused. So one way to think about this, a less generous take on activism would say that it's very much about that person and their feelings about this thing, and that they feel driven to do something about it. And that's kind of where it ends. Like, that's kind of the full extent that it goes to. And that's when you start getting into, like, this issue of that person maybe feel a lot internally and individually, but they are reluctant to do something to actually confront this societal problem as part of a collective, right? It's really, some would say that an activist is more concerned with their self-perception of righteousness than they are concerned with solving the problem. In this regard, activism is often seen as less risky than organizing. And I think an example of that can look like, tweet, like a lot of people talk about slacktivism online, right? So slacktivism, meaning like you're not really doing that much, but you talk about it a lot on the internet and you think you're doing something. So like if you're tweeting a hashtag for a cause, right? And you claim that the reason why you're doing that is to like raise social consciousness, right? You're raising consciousness or awareness about the issue, but you're avoiding confronting the power structures that could actually make that change, even though obviously we know that spreading information and educating people on the issue is important, but even if people are all educated about it, if we're not actually confronting the people with power to change it, it probably will stay the same. So for that reason, it can often be seen as, when you say somebody's an activist, there's sometimes this less generous perception that person, they care very much about this issue, but their concern is more about their own kind of need to do something with it. And they're not really so inclined to actually take the much riskier steps that it would take to create change. I think a more generous take on that would be that activism can also just be seen as you always throw down for this issue that you care about, right? So if let's just pick a thing, you care about access to abortion, safe, accessible abortions. You may not be part of an organization that works to provide, funding for, Planned Parenthoods or for abortion clinics. But you might always show up as a person at protests. You may always donate to an organization that does do that. You just may not be doing actual work for that, right? You may just kind of be always ready to throw down, but you're kind of like acting as yourself, and not part of a bigger collective. And you kind of just stop there. Like, you always show up, you always show out, you're tweeting the things, you're calling the senator, but you're not really part of something larger, and other people who are doing that with you, right? This is the other important part here, which is that let's say you show up to a rally that's about access to abortion. You don't know anybody else there. Other people are obviously also there because they care about that thing, but you don't really know what, like, for example, you might all be there because you feel that Roe v. Wade should not be overturned. But you don't know if all of you there agree on, like, we should, like, the other steps of, like, how are we going to provide the opportunity for any woman or any person in this country to receive an abortion if they want one, right? So you just may have differing opinions on that, and you're not all on the same page on it. Not to say you're in opposition with each other, but you just don't know, because a large number of you probably just showed up as individuals because you heard this thing was going on. You haven't necessarily talked about it. You don't necessarily have a plan of, like, what are we going to ask them to do instead, right? Or what is our unified or else if they don't do the thing we're telling them to do? So for this reason, I'm actually going to use that as an example. So I live in Washington, D.C., as some of you may know if you've watched me before and you've heard some of my rants about D.C. They were good rants. They were good rants. They were just rants. So I have attended, see, like, and sort of the part where I'm like, it's not necessarily anything wrong with you. I'm not judging you because I've been there. Oh, I should have grabbed it. I can grab it. Let me just make a point. Let me grab something. All right, so before I make it sound like I'm like ranking on activism, let me just I was once one of you, okay? Like, let's stop acting like I haven't done my fair share of activism, okay? This is a 2018 Women's March scarf. It's not 2017, the first year. I didn't have money for a scarf that year, but I had money for a scarf the next year, and I bought one. And it's covered with a bunch of different pins, okay? We've got Don't Build a Wall. We've got, like, Love is Love. We've got Pussy Power. Okay, I'm going the wrong way. We've got Pussy Power. We've got We Call BS. Look at this. I've got the Snowflake one. Like, come on. Like, let's not... I've been there, okay? So to give a more concrete example, let's talk about the Women's March for a moment. So many of us, especially that first Women's March, many of us, came from all over the country to, as I understood it, have a display of power against the election of Donald Trump, right? And his inauguration. And so we got our buses and we went, and it was incredible. For anybody who was there, especially that first year, it was like, wow, it was the first of those. I mean, ultimately, after the fact, we had many big marches like that, but it was like the first one in decades. My history may be off on that. Was Occupy bigger? Occupy wasn't bigger. Anyway. If you were there, it was very powerful, the number of people that were there in Washington, D.C. and in cities all over the country. I went. I didn't live in Washington, D.C. at that time, but I came here for that at the time. And, as much as I think actions like that are marches especially, that are huge actions, what did we want to come out of the Women's March? I'm just asking, what did we want to happen? And whatever you answered, do you think we all shared the answer you just said? Or do you think we kind of all had different ideas? And then what ultimately happened because all of us were there? I think at the time, if you had asked me, and it was a long time ago, but I think at the time, if you had asked me, why are you all going and marching? We'd have said, well, we're showing a display of power. And I wouldn't have said it this eloquently, but with my now organizing brain and remembering how I felt at the time, this is what I think I would have said. This is a display of power to show, and I think a lot of people said this too, that he cannot continue, Donald Trump cannot, it's unreasonable the way he speaks about women, the way he degrades women, and we will not accept his abuse of women while he is in white. We have to accept that he is going to be the president, but we will not allow his treatment of us. Did he treat women any better? And so that's a problem, right? It was yes, huge display of power. Wow, incredible. I think inspiring for many people there. What happened to all of the, because if you lived in not Washington, D.C. and you traveled to the Women's March, that there was local state coordinators and local coordinators who were coordinating the buses and all the people, and there were Facebook groups, and what happened to those networks? What happened to those networks and that leadership development opportunity? What happened to all those leaders in local city and town chapters that were doing this amazing work to coordinate bus rides? What happened to them? Because I think many of them, it was kind of once the action was done, once the march happened, it was we're done. We'll see y'all next year. And so, and many of us returned the next year. Okay. Like, let's stop. At that point I lived in DC. So I feel like, of course I went, I lived here, but what happened to those networks? Were those people like doing things, especially the people who not only had participated, but who were leaders? What did they do in kind of the interim years, right? In the interim time in between marches, and what are they doing now? And so that's what I mean when I say, like, many of us were there as activists. We were going to throw down for this issue, right? We were going to show up and we were going to show out. But were we all politically aligned? Did we all have a clear agenda? Was it obvious what we were trying to achieve? Would we have known if we got it? I don't think so, right? Another example, since I was using abortion Roe v. Wade as an example, I can also say that when Roe v. Wade was overturned, I similarly, being in Washington, D.C., went to the Supreme Court because I just knew there would be people there. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to go. And I don't even really know why I went. I just was like, I have to go. Almost in like I have to be around people who are also upset about this. And when I got there, I got this very strange feeling, because even though I totally understand marches, rallies, especially on things like this, as like a form of like understanding you're not alone in the way that you feel, and also as a little bit of a catharsis, my organizing brain couldn't turn off. And I was like, there was a lot of people chanting. I forget what the chant was now, but it was like, it was like, it wasn't "get your hands off my rights," but it was like, "you won't take away my rights," kind of a thing. Like, my body, my choice. And I was like, it was one of those. I don't remember what it was, but I remember thinking like, no, we're too late for that. We're too late for that. It's not to say we're too late overall. It's never too late. But we're too late for what we're doing right now. It's too late. They've already done it. In the next 24 hours, there will be places in this country that it will no longer be legal to get an abortion. It's too late to say you won't take away our rights. They already did. And so I am thinking to myself, now is the or else portion of organizing, where we say, don't do this or else. And they did it. And now we have to follow through. Now, all of us there that day, we were not all part of one organization. We were all in different places politically. We probably all had very different ideas of how to proceed, right? So, it was really more of a rallying the troops kind of a moment, and I totally understand that. But that's just to kind of illustrate to you activism versus organizing. Another good example is that sometimes, hold on. In some organizing trainings I'm a part of, we talk about the difference between actions and activities. And I think that can also be kind of illustrated similarly, in that activities don't necessarily, what's the word I was looking for? They don't necessarily, confront those power structures, right? So activities can look like community building things, right? So they can be like listening sessions, or like book clubs, or things like that. Like, those aren't, or they're part of organizing, just like I said before. Just like, obviously, educating people on an issue is important for organizing, and is a part of it. It's not organizing in and of itself. It's just a part of it, and kind of in isolation, it's not organizing. If all you do is education-based or activity-based or kind of activism-based, that's not organizing. But it's obviously a component of good organizing, because you can't mobilize people around an issue area they don't know about, right? You can't get them to confront a power structure unless they understand, A, how this power structure is even relevant, and B, what you're trying to get them to do and how this would benefit them, right? So, like, obviously it's related, but on its own, it's not organizing. So just like that with actions versus activities, right? Activities can be helpful for organizing, because they can, the good thing is I'm about to talk about what organizing is. Activities can be useful or needed, right? Because you may need to educate people on something. You may be just dealing with something that's hugely emotional, and people need a space to talk about that. Gun violence is a great example. If you're doing organizing around gun control and gun violence, you often need a space for people to help deal with those emotions, if you're able to provide that, because it's a hugely emotional issue and it touches people so personally. But in and of itself, if you just did that and you did nothing else, you would not be organizing them, right? Because if you were just there as like a safe space for people to talk about their feelings and their emotions, that's a beautiful thing. And I don't take that away for a moment, and it may be very necessary, but you're not confronting any power structures, right? You're just dealing with this emotional trauma. So those are my examples of activism. So now I'm going to move into organizing. So, organizing in relation to everything I just said, I'm going to now be referencing back to a lot of things I just said to say, yeah, you remember how I said, this is not that. That didn't make any sense. You get what I'm saying. You know what? You get me. So, organizing, one of the biggest components is relationships, right? So you have to know your people, and your people have to know each other. I'm going to pull up, not this, this. Get rid of that. So this is the snowflake model of organizing. Some people also refer to a related theory to this as the starfish model of organizing, but the snowflake model of organizing is exactly what you think. So these four people in the dark blue in the center may be like the organizers, right? So if you have an organization that has paid staff, this would be them, right? So they get to know one person or maybe two people, right, in this outer ring, right? And those people get to know other people, right? And you're always bringing people in, right? In organizing, we are building people power, right? Organizing is defined as building and exercising power in order to shape politics, policies, and outcomes. But the kind of power we're usually building is people power. We need more people. You cannot do this alone. You cannot do this in isolation. You can never do everything. It will take many, if not close to all of us, to do and make some of the changes we are trying to make. And that means that it will be hugely dependent on your ability to build relationships with people who can also build relationships. And building relationships for organizing, not just like, oh, I have some friends. I mean, having friends is great. And you can be friends with people you organize with, but building relationships for organizing purposes very intentionally, right? So the reason this is called the starfish model also sometimes is because the idea is, and this model doesn't illustrate it great, but the idea is, you can kind of see it here. So like these people in the green, so you have the blue people and then you have the green people. The green people also know each other, right? So this premise being that if you cut off one arm of this starfish, or one of the organizers, one of the inner core people, or any person, the work would still continue and eventually that arm would grow back, right? You might have a little bit of a setback, but the work could continue. It's never dependent on one person. And that was kind of what I was saying about you can't do it alone. It's also that you should never be doing it alone. Something should never be held only with you, that if you weren't there, it couldn't happen. That's part of the, we're not hoarding power, in organizing ever. If you want to learn something or you want to take over part of something, you are the thing. So you should be involved in it heavily. And obviously there's some instances where, and this is where I could, but I won't get into the nonprofit industrial complex. There are some things that obviously, if you have a nonprofit that is doing organizing, some things do get kind of held in some smaller silos, mostly like executive functioning things, like how do we set our budget and like how is money used, or even sometimes bylaws of the organization can be kind of but usually it's very little. That's if you have a 501c3 nonprofit that is organizing. But other than that, especially as most of the time when we talk about this, we mean it in terms of campaigns, right? So it's I as an organizer don't hold the decision-making power and the ultimate veto power for what we do about a campaign. That's held within all the members. And yes, I have a voice just like everybody has a voice. If I have an opinion, I'm welcome to share it. But it doesn't ultimately come down to me, which also means that if I wasn't there, if I was sick, if I was arrested, if something happened, or if I just said, screw this, I'm not doing this anymore and left, the people there, I have built up leadership and I've built up confidence in that base working on this, that they know they could do it without me. Organizers are always organizing themselves out of a job, both because the issue would be solved and also because the community won't need us anymore. Because they, as you see here, like the green people are now organizing the light blue people. They've gotten those skills. They've gotten that leadership development. They're confident. They are engaged. They're invested. And so they're going out and doing it. I, as a blue person, I didn't have to talk to these five people. I had to talk to one person, and they got 5 people. It's also, in terms of that kind of a structure, although not at all similar in the end accomplishments or the reason why we're doing it. Like, you ever hear people talk about with MLMs? I'm so sorry that I'm even bringing this into the conversation. But you ever hear people talk about with MLMs like, oh, like if you recruit 5 people and they recruit 5 people, I forget what the number is of how many levels, but it's basically like it only takes like 17 layers before you've reached the population of the world. And so it's that kind of a thing. Not to say that everybody has to bring in 5 people. It's not hard numbers like that, but you can really exponentially expand your base if you're developing leaders who are also talking to other people and bringing them in. And sometimes it's just the one person you talk to bring in one other person, but that one person may bring in another person, and now you've got 2 additional people you wouldn't have had, right? That you didn't even have a connection to. So what's great about this kind of a model is that, again, it's not all on me as an organizer. It's not that I have to be like, how many people do we have in this diagram? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's 8, and they're each talking to 5 people, so that's 40 plus the 8, so that's 50 people. There's, close to 50 people, and none of this inner circle has to know all 50 of these people, right? They know one, they know a couple, a handful that they can really work with, and then those people know other people, right? And this keeps going exponentially. So all that to say that relationship building is so foundational, and also because we're doing riskier things than actions, it requires greater amounts of trust, right? Let me get close again. Because we're doing riskier actions, not activities, but actions where we are confronting power structures. This may look like things where people can get arrested, right? Trespassing on property, blocking intersections, pick your favorite, chaining yourself to a tree or a building, things where you might get arrested. You obviously want a greater amount of trust between people. And also even think about, like, not even risky things like that where you're at risk of getting arrested, but like think about union organizing, right? As one person at your workplace, if someone's talking to you about, potentially joining this union, you'd be like, I don't want to get in trouble. I'm not sticking my neck out. I don't want to lose my job. And you have to build that trust with them and that relationship with them where they understand, that they're part of something and they're not alone, and they have trust with the other people who are part of it too, that like we've all got each other's backs, right? So obviously that takes more time, right? Because you may talk to somebody about joining a union, and the first 3 times you talk to them, they're like, no, kick rocks. And like, it's understandable, right? Even just, I know as a white person, if you didn't notice, there's often times where I may be talking to people of color about a particularly sensitive topic, right? And they don't want to talk to me when they don't know me. That makes sense, right? They don't want to talk to me about that sensitive thing the first time they meet me because they don't know me, right? They may not really trust me, right? They may not, and it's not even like a personal thing. It's like they also might have been done dirty by other, people from, not necessarily organizers, but other organizations, right? That had a white person that came and told them I was going to help you with all your problems and then didn't care 2 months later. Like that happens, right? So of course you're skeptical of me, right? So maybe it takes like, the first time I talk to you, it's not a very deep conversation, but it's just getting to know you. And it's that second or that third or that fourth conversation where I feel like we've built up a rapport. You seem to trust me. You know who I am. You know, I'm not like that lady who came to talk to you. I'm Grace. You know me, right? And now we can talk about that if you're comfortable, right? Another huge part of organizing, I'm calling this like the resources, but that feels like I don't like it. But it's finding out what people do best. I used to work with an organizer who said, everybody has their own special and unique gifts to offer the movement. And that's what you're discovering when you talk to somebody. And I think that's so right. There are many different roles in organizing. I think this is also a misconception that as an organizer, like, you're the person at the front of that march with a megaphone. If you're a good organizer, you're never the person at the front of the march with a megaphone. You are in the back and you are doing something else random and practically nobody knows you exist, right? Not because you're not doing things, but because you're not leading it, because the most impacted are the ones leading it, right? The people who have the most to gain are the ones who are leading it, right? The leaders you've built up from the community are the ones leading it, right? Not you. So everybody has something to offer, and there's so many different roles. There's roles for people who are, healers. There's roles for people who are storytellers. There's roles for people who are researchers. There's roles for people who are, relationship builders, right? And I think that's so beautiful, right? That we can accommodate for all of these different types of personalities that we have, that exist in the world, right? But also that it really does benefit all of us. I'm trying to see, oh my God, I have it up. Oh my God, I don't have it. I can't screen share it. But I have a list of some different ones. There's experimenters, right? So people who innovate and take risks and course correct, right? There's frontline responders, right? Who are maybe doing some of those mutual aid work, right? There's visionaries. There's people that are imagining the better world that we could be living in. There's caregivers, right? Which is what I said. They nourish the people around them. So necessary. There's healers. There's disruptors, who are maybe the more people you're thinking of with the megaphone, right? Storytellers. There's guides, right? Which I think is also great. That kind of an idea of people who have well-earned discernment and wisdom to pass on, right, to what we're doing. There's builders, who are kind of like taking the resources you have and organizing them for the vision that you've created. So yeah, there's a lot of different roles. And I think that that's really beautiful. And so when I go into a one-on-one with someone I've never met, a one-on-one is a conversation for organizing purposes to establish a relationship, right? It's a chat. It's a chit-chat. But it usually centers around, like, 70% of it is about organizing, depending on who it is. Some people who I've known a long time, it's like, well, it's like 30% of I'm kidding. No, so it's an intentional conversation about organizing. And when I meet with people, especially for the first time, one of the questions I ask myself always going in is, what is this person's special talents to offer the movement? And it's always different. And I love setting myself up with that question, because I think I set myself up for a wonderful, beautiful surprise every time, because I never know. I don't know what I'm walking into. And that's great. An example I want to give of this that's not a great organizing example, but it's something I want to think about. That's something I want to use. It's not an organizing example because it was not organized, but an example of everybody has their special and unique gifts. I think about during the pandemic when musicians who couldn't perform just took to their balconies in New York City and just started playing concerts for people. And actually, that didn't just happen in New York. That happened in a lot of cities. But I think about that, right? Like, they knew that their talents and their skills and their gifts, they couldn't use them in the normal ways that they could, but they wanted to do something, right, for everyone. And they said, this is what I have to offer. And you know what? It was beautiful. It was, uplifting. And it was, a silver lining for a lot of people, right? It was a beautiful part of their day in an otherwise very dark time. right? So that they were offering what they had to make life a little bit better. Another key part of organizing is reciprocity, right? So being willing to share what you have. So not only identifying these gifts that you have, but being willing to share that, knowing that by doing this, the community is really doing something to improve itself, and also that if you ever needed that support, it would be there for you. That's true of like mutual aid work too. And I don't want to say it's not true of activism, but it's obviously harder in activism. But because you have these tightly woven networks, you know that if you need something, there's people there for you, right? And you give what you can when people need it, right? So as I kind of said before when we were talking about mutual aid, and this is a good transition because I'm now kind of referencing mutual aid again, mutual aid is much more focused on short-term needs of a community, and organizing is more focusing on long-term objectives aimed at extracting tangible gains from those in power, right? So that's why it helps that they go in tandem with one another, because these long-term objectives can take a long time. I often like to say to people that if some of the issues that we are still organizing around could have been won quickly, I feel confident that some of our predecessors would have won it, but these are lifetime battles, right? So yeah. But it's I think the other important part of organizing is it's the extracting tangible gains from those in power. The from those with power is the important part that I was talking about before. Us going to the Supreme Court and saying you won't take away our rights after they already did. What were we hoping to gain from those with power in that moment? It's a bad example because it was spontaneous, but the Women's March, what were we hoping to gain from those with power? What tangible thing did we want from them? I don't think that was clear. The other thing about organizing, because of the snowflake model, right, you're creating lasting people power. It's much more stable because, like I said, it's understood that sometimes people can go in and out, right? Because the work will continue, right? Even if one person leaves or a couple people leaves, the work should still go on because all of that power and that decision making is held within multiple people. It's not just held in one person. A lot of times, if you, like I said before, if you need more capacity, and this, you probably always need more capacity than what you have, you need people. So sometimes people think about the have, need, and want model for organizing. So organizing is using what you have to get what you need to get what you want. So you kind of work backwards. So if what you want is, let's pick something. If what you want is some kind of a legislative change, if something you want is for, if something you wanted was for Roe v. Wade not to be overturned, right? Sorry if that's a depressing example, because I'm like, if what you wanted was something that happened anyway, but if what you wanted was for Roe v. Wade not to be overturned, what you usually always need is organized people who are all around, like, focused on this one shared cause and goal and outcome. And what you usually have is like people as raw materials. Like, let me give a better example. If what you want is a tenant association in your building, what you need is for tenants in that building to form a what you need is for tenants in that building to come together and, decide on if they want to, do that or kind of set up that structure. You might need some leaders, right? And usually what you have is a building full of tenants who don't know each other. So, okay, what you have is, disorganized people. And what you need is for them to be organized around one specific thing to get what you want, which is this specific thing, in this case, a tenants organization. So that, I hope, is more clarifying on what organizing is as opposed to what it is not. Now, because I know I've gotten to the end of my time here, as I just have rambled for this past hour, you might be saying to yourself, Grace, why are we talking about this? why am I going over all this with you? Why are we here? And I want to emphasize that I'm not telling you this to be judgmental. Obviously, I'm not telling you this to be judgmental. What is this little pin? I'm not telling you this to be judgmental about mutual aid or activism. I'm telling you this because I think your time, your energy, your blood, sweat, and tears, your talents, your gifts are valuable and are precious. And I want you to use them wisely in whatever way that makes sense for you. Take a little sip here. My mouth is very dry. And so what I mean by that is, if, what makes sense for you is that, listen, I don't have the energy, I don't have the time commitment for organizing. But I really care about people in my community and I want to do something. So I'm going to join a local mutual aid network. It's in my neighborhood. And I'm going to put some time in there on Saturdays because I really want my neighbors to know that I'm supportive of them. And I don't know how I feel about some of these long-term solutions, but I do know that the people in my neighborhood need help, putting food on their table, and I want to help with that. Go forth, prosper. I support you. I'm here for you, right? I think more the case that I'm thinking about is, someone who says, I really care about, this certain issue, and I've been going to all these protests and going to all these rallies and going to all these, and I just don't feel like anything's working. It's those of you I'm worried about, because I don't want you to feel like you've lost hope and like there is no hope. Because what you're doing is unfocused, right? Which isn't your fault. But if channeled in the right directions and in the right places, your energy could be so valued, right? And could be part of another drop in the bucket, right? That gets us closer to where we're going. A lot of things, I know I've talked about burnout in the past on this podcast. On this Twitch stream before. Have I? I feel like I have. Yeah, I have talked about it. I like that I just have all my scripts next to me. So I'm just like, wait, and I'm like, yeah, I did. But if you weren't there, you should listen to that episode. But if you didn't listen to it, I often say that, as I said before, if these issues could have been solved in 10 years, I have no doubt that many predecessors before us would have solved them. But these are lifetime-long issues, multiple lifetime-long issues in some cases. We are undoing sometimes hundreds of years of shit, and we can't solve that in 10 years. So the movement is not benefited by you burning out in a year. It's just not. It's better for you to give what you can in a healthy way for as long as you can. And there's no judgment to however long that is before you reach your limit. But it's better for you to do that in a way that's sustainable, because that's what's going to benefit us the most. All of us the most, is you doing it in a healthy way. Because no one's benefited by you burning out. Don't I know it? Yeah, so I'm more concerned about the folks who are maybe more in that activism or in the mutual aid category, right? If you're feeling that, I think this is totally valid. I've talked to many people who feel like this, where they obviously love the mutual aid work they're doing, or they think they see the value in it, but they're like, at the same time that I'm doing this, I also want to start talking about how we don't just leave something very broken that's causing harm to a lot of people, because they understand, right? If you provide, if you're working on mutual aid, that you're mopping up a leak in a dam, and sure, you can keep mopping it up, but it's going to keep coming, right? Because the harm is still being done on a deep systematic level. And so unless you start addressing the crack in the dam, it's just going to keep coming, right? And how long before you can't do this anymore. Nobody can do this anymore. You run out of resources, right? Like, it's just going to keep coming. So sometimes people recognize that in addition to what they're doing in their mutual aid networks, they also want to talk about how we can actually stop some of these systemic issues, which I think is beautiful if you have the capacity for that. And I love that for you, and I support you. And please don't burn out. Please don't burn out. So that's really what I mean by I want you to use your time and your energy in a way that is the most beneficial, because I think it's valuable. And I hate when people, and I can say this because this was me for a period of time, I hate when we think we're doing organizing but we're actually doing something like activism, and then we get discouraged, and then we feel like this isn't worth it and there's nothing I can do to change this position I'm in. That's not true. Organizing is the only thing that always eventually works. Every right that we have, we've gotten through organizing. And so it takes a long time in many instances, right? And that's why we need the support of those who do, mutual aid work, and other kinds of work. But it's always the thing that eventually works, and we have to remember that. And it's why I love it so much. So that's my rant for today. I'm sorry that I went over time. But as I have said previously, my name is Grace. I'm a digital organizer here at the Redress Movement. I do this Twitch live stream every other Thursday. So I will be back in 2 weeks. And I talk about housing related justice things. I talk about organizing related things. I talk about things that make me laugh. And yeah, so you can follow us on our social media accounts, which are down here. There's Twitter, there's Instagram. This is our email, hello@redressmovement.org. If you're interested in getting involved, feel free to check that out. Or feel free to email us, and I will get you connected with either one of our digital organizers, or if you live in Denver, Charlotte, or Milwaukee, one of our field organizers. They'd love to talk to you and get you involved in the work that we're doing. You can also go to our website to learn more, redressmovement.org. There's a lot of great resources on there if you're interested in learning about segregation in your hometown. But there's a lot of great resources there to get you started. And yeah, I think that's everything I have. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday night, and I will see you back here in 2 weeks. Good night, everybody.